Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. I'm Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc. Well, as promised, we have another exciting guest to be featured on today's premiere, Colin Rule. Now, Colin represents a highly interesting background. Not only is he hugely experienced in the world of mediation, but he has been one of the most entrepreneurial and innovative persons I think I've ever met. Colin actually helped develop some of the initial early approaches to online dispute resolution and developed the program used by eBay. In fact, his early collaboration and entrepreneurship took him from the East Coast to the West Coast, where he worked for a number of years with eBay. Well, he didn't stop there. He's gone on to innovate, develop, create all kinds of, again, entrepreneurial ventures. Not only is he a key founder and originator of the virtual platform, he is on top of emerging technologies to resolve disputes. Listen and learn as we get into our discussion about how he was just recently beamed into Japan in a hologram kind of atmosphere. Where technology will take us in the field of dispute resolution has much to yet be seen. So please join us. It's coming up right next. Don't go away. In fact, you've got a few minutes to invite your friends. There's going to be a countdown, so please join on. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do so. You want to know about next and upcoming thought leaders in the world of dispute resolution. Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Hi, I'm Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Conflict Mindset Doc, and we're here today to bring to you a very special guest. I'm so excited because we go back at least 15 years, and he has revolutionized the world when it comes to online mediation. And so welcome, Colin Rule. Welcome, Colin.
Thank you, Deborah. Very happy to be here with you.
Well, this is exciting. And so I just want to say up front, Colin has stories to tell, and on a high level, eBay and Google and all these kinds of things. And so started up new companies and sold them successfully. So you got to listen because he's one to learn from for sure. Yeah.
Wow. Well, compliments will get you everywhere. Thank you. Yeah, there's been a lot of ups and downs, but it's fun to only look back on the ups.
Well, and we have to learn from the downs, but yeah, it's the big picture, right?
That's true. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as I already mentioned, Colin, you have been sort of a, pioneer when it comes to ODR, online dispute resolution. And I do want to just share with our listeners and viewers a little bit about your background before we dive into some of these great stories I know you have to tell. And, particularly I'm real thrilled because you've recently become the CEO of Mediate.com, which has been around for over 20 years, just celebrated 25 years, right?
That's right. Yeah, the 25th anniversary. Jim Malamed and John Healy founded it in the mid-90s. And actually, I was lucky enough to be general manager at Mediate.com back in 99, before I ever went to eBay. Yeah, so this is kind of a coming home for me. So wow. I'm delighted to be back in the field. Yep.
Wow, that's a piece I did not know. Okay, great. And then, and I didn't know this history behind Modria, that you had actually found that way back in 2011.
That's right.
And and that was an online dispute resolution based out of Silicon Valley. And of course, what better place to be entrepreneurial and developing technology, right?
That's right. Well, they say in Hollywood, everybody's got a screenplay, and in Silicon Valley, everybody's got a business plan. So yeah. So
okay.
But yeah, I came out here in 2003 to San Jose, California, to work for eBay, and I worked there for 8 years until 2011. And then we spun out some technology that we had created to do online dispute resolution, something called the Resolution Center, and we started Modria. So and we ran that for 6 years, and then we sold it in 2017. So yeah, it's been kind of fun to be out here, and we call it Nerdvana. It's not Nirvana, it's Nerdvana.
Nerdvana. Oh yeah, gosh, so, I had not heard that. So yeah, that's really good.
For a computer geek like me, this is the greatest place to be. So
well, wonderful. Well, I have to ask you. I always like people's stories, and we'll get into yours more. But when you say you moved to Silicon Valley, where did you come from?
Well, I came from Boston, actually.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Went to grad school in Boston and then started my first company there. Actually, when I worked for Mediate.com, I was still in Boston, but I ran a company called Online Resolution that I started in 2000, and that was really one of the first online dispute resolution service providers. But I wrote a book called Online Dispute Resolution for Business, and the eBay guys found the book on Google and called me up and said, "We need you." So they brought me out here. So that was how I ended up in California. So it's been almost coming up on 20 years.
Wow.
I still feel like more of a Bostonian than a Californian, but I guess if I've been here for 20 years, maybe I'm a Californian now.
Well, I don't know. I've been out here for 40, and I was told that I would never have guessed you were from Minnesota originally because you don't talk like them at all. I said, well, I've
I
been
know.
here a long time. So,
Well, I grew up in Texas, and people say, Texas, I don't get any of that in your accent
yeah.
at all. And I always joke, well, it took years of finishing school to get rid of it. So,
Yeah.
but when I go back to Texas, the y'all comes right back. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. I know what that's like going to Minnesota. That's for sure. Yeah. And so, you know, not only a couple of different businesses that you started up and sold, but, you know, you've been very entrepreneurial for quite some time, and that's really impressive.
Mm.
And that might be a whole nother story we might talk about in another episode, to talk about what it means to start up a business in this kind of business.
Well, it's true. It's funny. Sometimes I'm brought into classes of entrepreneurs as opposed to dispute resolution people. And boy, I got a lot of stories. You talk about the ups and downs. We say in Silicon Valley, when you're trying to raise money, you have to get your 99 no's before you get your one yes. So,
Oh,
it's nice to look back and think there was one investor that said, yes, let's do this. But there were certainly a lot that said no. And you just got to get through that. So you're
wow.
right. I got lots of good entrepreneur stories to tell too, but it's all
Yeah.
mixed together in my mind, my dispute resolution and my entrepreneurship stories.
Wow. Well, I think that's great. I mean, certainly a great blending of both worlds, and you know, you've certainly been successful with that. I know that you've written prolifically, and there's a long list, and so I'll come back to that later. But I do want to acknowledge that you're also the co-chair of the advisory board for the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution at UMass in
That's right.
Amherst, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. The NCTDR, the National Center for
Mhm.
Technology and Dispute
Mhm.
Resolution, the website is odr.info, and it's really the home of the global online dispute resolution movement. But the father of ODR is a guy named Ethan Katch, he's a professor emeritus at UMass Amherst, and he named the field, and he created, originally it was called the Center for Information Technology and Dispute Resolution, but it became NCTDR. So it's a wonderful organization. Many of my closest collaborators are fellows of NCTDR. So we've had an annual ODR forum meeting that we've done since 2001, every single year, well, except for the pandemic. And I can't wait. That's as much as I love ACR, as much as I love the ABA dispute resolution section, that conference is where I see my closest friends, and we can all catch up. So we're going to do it again in Dublin at the beginning of May. So if anybody wants to join us, it's odr2022.org, and it's going to be wonderful to see everyone in person again. I can't wait.
Yeah. Oh, that's going to be absolutely wonderful. And in Dublin, Ireland,
in Dublin,
right?
Yeah, at University College, right in the city center. So our host, Brian Hutchison, is a professor there. He's been a professor there for decades. So I think he's going to put on a really good party. So if you want to take a trip to Dublin, come join us. It'll be great. First Guinness is on me.
Okay, very good, very good. Well, I've never been to Dublin, so that's an intriguing invitation. But I have to admit, I just got back from Paris, just not even a week ago.
Well,
yeah,
hard to compete with Paris. Yeah.
Well, it was pretty neat. I was invited to speak at the Global Summit for Positive Psychology and Mental Health.
Wonderful! Congratulations. That's amazing.
Yeah, so it was pretty neat, and we were celebrating the International Women's Day. So, you know,
it was right around. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So it was pretty neat. Yeah, but I want to go to one more thing before we jump into some of my questions for you, because not only on the East Coast, you've also are a fellow at Stanford with the Gould Center for Conflict Resolution. And so just tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so a lot of people know the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School, and I went to grad school at Harvard, and there's some amazing people at Harvard, and I've worked in Cambridge for several years. But the Gould Center is actually the home of negotiation at Stanford Law School, and Jan Martinez is the current director there, and she is just a wonderful, wonderful colleague. As long as I've known you, I've known Jan even longer than that, because we worked together at the Consensus Building Institute back in Boston. But she's so forward thinking about all the different areas that negotiation, conflict resolution is moving in. And so many of the people not only within the law school, but Stanford writ large, are interested in conflict resolution. So she's just a repository of wisdom. And I really appreciate that she invited me in to be a non-resident fellow at Gould. So I usually teach a couple classes there a year and meet with the LLMs. And she just did a conference just a couple weeks ago in conjunction with the Moritz College of Law at Ohio State and Harvard Law School on truth and reconciliation commissions, and how we can use technology to deal with racial reconciliation. It was just an amazing conference. So Jan is one of my closest colleagues. I teach with her all the time, and she's the reason why I have been invited and welcomed into the Stanford community.
Well, that's just really marvelous. I don't know if you know this, but so some of my research with the psychology background and the neuroscience is that,
Sure.
I've done a lot of research into compassion, particularly as the Dalai Lama talks about it.
Oh, yeah.
And one of his top right-hand aides is actually working very closely with Stanford on the research, the neuroscience behind compassion and how we can use that to influence shifts in
Amazing.
mindset for conflict resolution. So I'll have to look
Sounds
further into
great.
what you're talking about. Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting stuff. I get so excited about it. So
That's so cool.
Yeah, and so that my presentation in Paris was on the neuroscience behind people in conflict and how to shift the mindset.
Amazing.
Yeah,
That's
so,
fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to learn more about what's happening at Stanford. I mean, that's the thing that's great about a place like Stanford or Harvard or many universities. There's so many amazing things happening. I mean, you walk across campus, there's research. I mean, there's the legal design lab at the design school. Margaret Hagan is a friend of mine. She's doing amazing things, rethinking the way the whole justice system can work from a human-centered design perspective.
Yay.
So I mean, you could spend all day and all night talking to people at Stanford about their research projects, and it's just endlessly inspiring. But to have these really smart students come in and get a chance to just sort of pull the curtain back and show them a bit about what's happening in online dispute resolution and dispute resolution writ large, it's great to see them get excited. And some of my students have gone on and become professors, and now they teach it. So I'm sure you've had that experience too over the years.
Yeah. Well, you reminded me, I hadn't thought about this for a while, but it goes back to 2013, but I was invited in to talk about how to inspire some of the presentations from some of the administrative staff that had to teach professors and how to apply for grants and all this stuff. And it was sort of boring stuff, but I was brought in to how can they make their presentations and engagement more inspiring and so forth, with the participants. But it was so neat because I don't remember her name at the time, but the dean of the Stanford University was pushing online education back then, and I, since I had already been teaching online, educationally in conflict resolution, it was like, well, this is exciting, and just the potential for, spreading education and opportunity to people that otherwise would never have access to those things. And that really takes us to dispute resolution then. And so, I'd like to get your overview of how you define ODR, or online dispute resolution.
Well, that's actually a really rich question. When I first started doing this work, as you mentioned, 20 some odd years ago, we defined ODR, Ethan and me and a couple others who were involved at that stage. We defined ODR as the use of information and communications technology to help people resolve their disputes. So really, it was very straightforward. And information and communications technology, a lot of people think that means the internet, and the internet is a very powerful information and communications technology, but there are others as well. Whether it's the telephone is a powerful communications technology, or even media like video editing and LCD projectors. Those aren't the internet, but they can be very helpful in a dispute resolution context. So I think that definition was adequate for a while. Eventually, we expanded it to be the use of information and communications technology to help people prevent, manage, and resolve their disputes. So it wasn't all about dispute resolution, kind of like the Association for Conflict Resolution is thinking more expansively about it. But now I think what we're realizing is, because there's so much ODR going on, that definition of ODR is ADR plus technology, it's not specific enough, because it doesn't really tell you what it is. It says, well, it's technology plus dispute resolution, but how exactly does it work? So the National Center for State Courts, because many courts are now deploying ODR, they defined ODR as an online collaborative space where parties can convene to resolve their dispute. And I think that's a pretty good definition too. It defines, like Zoom is a good example of, it's an online space where we can get together and resolve our dispute, or it could be a text-based, like a discussion forum or something like that. But I think what that leaves out is the whole portion of the field that's kind of more algorithmic, like artificial intelligence or machine learning or calculators, or there's some amazing things happening leveraging the power of computers and sort of game theory to, what we say in the ODR field, we talk about the fourth party. So party one and party two are the disputants. The third party is the human neutral, the mediator, the arbitrator, the coach, and then technology is the fourth party. So what that National Center for State Courts definition leaves out is the fourth party. Like, what if we have an Amazon Echo on our desk and it's listening to everything we're saying, could we ever say to that echo, Alexa, what's a fair, oh, I have an Alexa. Stop, Alexa, stop, sorry. The name, what's a fair resolution to this dispute? What would be a reasonable, and then that algorithm could go out and look at a million similar cases around the world and come back and say, it seems like a fair resolution in this case would be that. And again, it's not putting the algorithm in charge, but it's leveraging the power of these computing devices all over the world and their scale to help people find fast and fair solutions to problems when they arise. And I think right now there's a little bit of doesn't make me feel that comfortable to think about an algorithm playing that role. But if you look at what's happened to society over the last 20 years, I mean, we've become much more comfortable with technology in many areas of our lives, even the way that we dispute with people that we love. So, think about the next 20 years. I think if anything, there's going to be more change coming in the next 20 years than there was in the last 20 years. So we're going to get much more comfortable with computers playing that role as computers get smarter and smarter and more capable. So I kind of gave you a circuitous attempt at a definition there, but it's really, if you think about ODR as ADR plus technology, I would even argue that ODR is ADR, and it might represent the kind of the future of ADR. As we integrate more technology into ADR, all ADR is going to become ODR. So.
Yeah, I mean, rich answer. So no apologies necessary.
Okay.
I mean, you gave a lot of information, a lot of insight, and it sort of framed some other questions that I might want to ask. Because what I'm hearing then is really using our technology, like you say, is sort of that fourth party, that mechanism, that collaboration space for parties to come together.
Sure.
And I know that I've talked a lot, particularly with Susan Guthrie, about this as far as the psychological safety that the virtual medium can actually present to parties who are otherwise in conflict, and you just don't feel the emotional heat that you would from parties when you're in person. And so it sort of creates a safer space, not only psychologically, but also physically, because people are still in their environment where they are comfortable.
Well, and we talk a lot about cooling distance. I think there's something about being able to interact asynchronously with the counterparty. It allows you to be a little bit more reflective, a little bit more thoughtful. When someone says something that's very challenging to you, you don't have to respond in the moment. Right. So sometimes the power of that sort of aggressive or threatening communication can dissipate over time. And when you get a message like that, you say, I'm going to walk the dog. I'm going to make a cup of tea. I'm going to go for a swim, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to look at this with fresh eyes. So that's hard to do in the room. Escalation, these cycles of escalation kick off. Now, there are also other dynamics online that are not so great. Another dynamic, and again, as an expert in this, you could probably tell me more about it than I know, but I've read articles talking about what they call online disinhibition effect, which is, when you interact with someone in person and you say something that's hurtful to them or insulting to them, you react because you can feel their emotion. You can feel how hurtful it is when they hear you say that. And it acts kind of as a disincentive. I mean, our moms taught us from the earliest age, to be polite. Don't say anything. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. But I think online, there's an element of, you can type something hurtful in the comment section on a YouTube video, or you can send an email to someone and say something really hurtful about someone else, that email is eventually forwarded to that person. But because you aren't looking at the reaction of the other side, you can maybe say things that you would never say to them face to face, that can be very hurtful, can be very destructive. And that's something that we in online dispute resolution, we have to factor that in to some of our dispute systems designs, because we want to minimize that aspect of interactions, because that's obviously very, very harmful to the resolution process to have those kinds of really insensitive, hurtful messages within a dispute resolution process. So, there are some positive dynamics and there's some negative dynamics. And I don't want people to think that I'm just rah, ODR is great, everything should move online. There are a lot of cases where technology actually makes things more complicated and moves the parties further apart. But once you understand these tools and you put them in your toolbox, you can sort of figure out, when do they help you fit the forum to the fuss? And I've seen many circumstances where, I've seen this in my own life, the dynamic I have with someone else is not that great face to face. But if we move it online and maybe we communicate textually, or we chat, or we send an email, or we do a video conference, it changes the dynamic. And then it allows us to not get into some of those negative patterns. And that's, that's something it's great for us to be able to leverage as mediators.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, you said so much there that, really resonates with me in terms of, some of the teachings I've tried to bring, in terms of the, psychological components and the neuroscience. And so, as I, when we react, that's where we do tend to say things that are hurtful, harmful, and damaging that we can't take back. And so then it's like, okay, what about personal accountability? And, how would you feel if that was said to you? And
Right.
is that the kind of, reputation, is that the kind of image that you want to, be known as?
Right.
And so, I mean, for me, it gets into, I'm a firm believer in pre-mediation coaching or pre-mediation preparation, and really preparing people for the experience and what are they looking for in the mediation process, and how does it serve them, how does it not, and the benefits as well as the downsides of it. But yeah, as far as, teaching people not to be so reactive, because
well, it's interesting too, sometimes they'll see on the internet, someone will post something very hurtful and very insulting and but then they'll go find that person, like they'll go and they'll meet them, and they're a normal kind of kind looking person. It doesn't seem like they would say that kind of thing at all. And I think one of the things, and again, I need to learn more about this. Maybe I should, you could train me about it. Identity is much more fluid online. We're much more in control of the way we present ourselves. And also you can create multiple identities online. So you may play an online game where you act like a barbarian and, you just blow everyone out of the way. And then you may be in another environment where you interact with your fellow members at church and you're just the kindest, nicest person in the world. So we sort of learn how to switch these hats based on which forum we're in online. And I think that that's also something that we need to think about in the dispute resolution field. How do we create an environment that's conducive to empathy and communication and understanding? And that's one of the challenges we have as online mediators. When our parties come into the room, we have to say, okay, this is the culture of this space. You can't be your online gaming barbarian. And you can't just be, your benighted, generous, give everything away to everyone else that you might be in another forum. Here, we need to bring our authentic selves, and we need to be honest, and we need to talk, and we need to listen. And if somebody starts to violate those norms, we have to say, okay, those aren't the norms here. And sometimes the agreement to mediate can help set those norms, but doing that online is very important. And it's one of the top challenges, I think, to online mediators, is setting the frame for the conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I know in some of the training I've done over the last year or two, and both Harold Coleman and I are very big proponents of, pre-mediation workup.
Oh yeah.
And so we've had some people going, I've been doing online, I've been doing mediation for years, and I never did pre-mediation, but I'm sold now. I'm not going back, and so it's sort of like, I guess subscribers to ODR, subscribers to the pre-mediation, and I look at it from it's preparing people for the technological aspects, but also the mediation process and how it will be conducted online, so people have some idea of what to expect.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things we're seeing is obviously mediation is changing technology, because we're building technology all the time for mediation, but also technology is changing mediation. I mean, the way that mediators conduct their processes are different when they do it Zoom based, because there's a convenience factor. It's like, we could just do a 30-minute, it's not like you have to wait for the parties to show up in your office and then you have 3 hours with them and then they leave and then you don't talk to them for 2 weeks. Instead, it's like, why don't we just jump on a Zoom call? Let's chat for 30 minutes. And, and instead of having a caucus where you send someone out in the hallway and they wait and then you bring them in, you could say, wait, why don't we take a break? I'll Zoom one of you, I'll Zoom the other one of you, and we can reconvene at 1. Everybody can get some lunch and have some tea and walk the dog. I mean, I've had some mediators who used to say to me, you can't do this online, it has to be face-to-face. And now that they've tried online, when their parties can be in their house with their cat on their lap, and just sort of in their happy place, people start to realize, as we norm these online channels of communication, there's some advantages in terms of helping parties be at their best, and I think that you're right. Sometimes sitting in the conference room at some law firm across the table from the person that is just making you so angry and frustrated, where you have to drive across town and wear a nice suit. I mean, that's a lot different than being in bed on a Saturday evening with a glass of Merlot on the bedside table, and you're like, okay, well, do I want Christmas or Easter, you know, for my the visitation schedule? I just think it helps parties be at their best. And I think that kind of psychological sense of safety, as you say, it doesn't trigger that anxiety, it doesn't trigger that fear about getting pulled back into all of these dynamics that were so hurtful in the first place. So it's a nice thing to be able to do that for our parties.
Yeah, you know, one of the analogies I oftentimes use, since we're both in California, you might know this place. I really enjoy going to Santa Catalina Island and Avalon Bay, and so I have a great picture that's, you know, up in the across the bay on one of those golf cart trips, you know, and so it looks back down. It was a gorgeous day in February, and it's just glistening, and so I started using that as like, well, you know, a harbor is much like what we want to create in mediation. We want to create a safe harbor so that people can get out of the high seas and the strong winds where it's risky. It's, it's possibly death or die, you know, but we want to come through this, you know, safe. And so we know how to use our safe harbor to create that space and therefore when we feel safe, we feel, you know, psychologically more prepared to do what we have to do.
I love that. I love that analogy. And, you know, one of my favorite books is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And I think one of the things we do as mediators is we try and get people to think slower. You know, sometimes when you're in the heat of a conflict, you have this fight or flight, you have a lot of your instinctive reactions, and you feel like, because you feel vulnerable, you feel like you have to respond to those immediate reactions. And being able to slow things down, it feels to me very much like your discussion of the safe harbor, you know? It's like, no, we can come into this harbor. We're safe here. We can have this conversation. It's not like a big wave is going to come and knock our boat over. It's like, we can have this discussion, and that lets you slow down, and maybe some of those instinctive reactions that you'll later regret, when you slow it down, you can control that a little bit more. You don't listen to the devil on one shoulder, you listen to the angel on the other one. So Yeah. Well, that's great. So I do want to, you know, make sure that I ask you, what are some of the examples of current ODR systems available to use or in use right now? Sure. Well, we just launched a service called odr.com, which I'm very, very proud of and excited about. So that we're going to be scaling that over the rest of the year. But there are so many great platforms now for online dispute resolution. You know, in the family context, we've seen a lot of ODR growth lately. Websites like WeVorce.com or BlissDivorce.com or HelloDivorce.com. There's one called It's Over Easy. It's amazing. You know, when I first started doing ODR, there was almost no online dispute resolution in family cases. And now it's almost becoming the new normal. And also courts are launching ODR systems left and right. I think something like 80 courts have launched ODR in the last 5 years, something like that. So there's a company called Matterhorn that's doing great systems, particularly around the Great Lakes region. And my company, Modria, was acquired by Tyler Technologies, and it's become one of the top court ODR platforms. But there's also great systems. I would highly recommend. There's one called Mediation, which is out of Australia, but they're launching in the United States. And they do video-oriented ODR with a lot of integrated tools into the platform. There's one called Resolve Disputes Online, RDO, which is based in the UK, which is also really great. So there's, again, we actually have an organization called ICODR, the International Council for Online Dispute Resolution. And we do demos for a lot of these ODR platforms. So we've had many, many people come in and show off their systems. So recently we had a demo from a platform called Adjudicate.com, which is doing kind of online arbitration. And there's one called Fairclaims.com and another new one out of Chicago called New Era ADR. So, you know, I could just give you examples. The odr.info website also has a list of providers that you can go check out. And it's not just the US. There's great platforms there's one called Amicable in the UK for divorce. And India is a real hotbed of ODR right now. So there's one called Sama, which is a great platform. So I urge people to explore and check them out. They all kind of take a different perspective on how it can work. But it's really an exciting time. There's just a flowering of all of this innovation And you know, my attitude is I love to let 1,000 flowers bloom. I don't think it's necessary to have one platform that everybody uses. So I urge you to check it out and look at the demos and view the websites and see if you can find one that fits well with the way you like to work.
Well, I had no idea. I thought I had heard of a lot of these things, but I haven't. So this is really informative to me. And so one
sure.
thing I'll tell my listeners and viewers that I will, listen to this and grab a list of those and put it into our show notes so that people can refer back to it. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And marvelous. I liked your analogy too, as far as instead of one platform, plant a lot of seeds for flowers. And so I think of a field of flowers.
Right.
And this is a whole new field. I mean, it's been an emerging field, but it's certainly blossoming big time, right now.
Well, we talked about the ups and downs. You know, when I first started doing this in 2000, there were a lot of companies that cropped up back then. And a lot of them didn't survive. A lot of them have shut down over time. But again, that's in Silicon Valley, they call that creative destruction. If you have 1,000 flowers that bloom and 900 of them die, well, that means the 100 that were the strongest kind of live, and then maybe their seeds go, and then we have another 1,000 flowers, and then they grow. So this cycle is kind of the way that innovation occurs. It's never a straight line. It's often, pretty circuitous. But I do think it's amazing to look. I mean, I'm sitting here speaking with you on Zoom. I feel like I'm sitting right across the table from you. I see you crystal clear. Your audio is perfect. And just think in 5 or 10 years where we're going to be, because it's going to be full 8K. I mean, I did a presentation in Japan just a couple of weeks ago, and it was via hologram. So they turned me into a hologram and generated me on stage in 360 degrees. I mean, yeah, it's amazing to think where all of this is going. Yeah. So, and I'll show you also, this is another thing that a lot of people are excited about is the Metaverse.
Oh, I've been hearing about this. Yes.
Well, you're just kind of put these goggles on, and then you're in a new world, and you can look around, and I mean, beautiful mountains and offices. And yeah, so I've actually done a couple mediation simulations in the Metaverse, sitting at a table with other avatars. It's other people wearing these goggles, and it actually works very well. You can do high fives, you can see people's expressions and see them nod along and ask questions, and the audio is right there. So the technology is only going to get better from here. Yeah. But it's amazing what we have today. So it's exciting to think about what we're going to have in the future.
Well, you mentioned this earlier, Colin, is that, what's evolved in the last 20 years, I mean, we see that analogy a lot in different aspects of our, current living, and that, what it took to get to the first 50 years, was, rapid compared to the prior 100 years. And now we've, achieved so much. And then, I mean, the growth and development in the last 50 years of the, before 2000 was phenomenal. And now we're already 2022 and look at what the changes are. Remember when we were all, oh my God, when all the zeros turn over in 2000,
Right, that's right. Everything was going to crash. Everyone was so worried about the year 2000 crash. Yeah. Well, it is. I mean, when I first started doing this work in 99, 2000, we didn't have iPhones. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have Google Docs. We didn't have, and I just remember every time I see a new technology emerge, well, you can never unring that bell. I mean, I remember the first time I saw an LCD projector, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to change everything. First time I had wireless Wi-Fi on my laptop, oh my gosh, this is going to change everything. So again, as a nerd, I applaud these things. I'm excited about, these are all tools. I think other people, it makes them uncomfortable. It's like things are moving too fast. I don't understand this new world. And I think that's reasonable, to be confronted with all this change, because it's so profoundly destabilizing. And the younger generation is comfortable with these technologies in a way probably you and I will never be, just because they've been born into a world where these things are normal. So, but that's good. I think it's good. These tools, if we use them right, they're going to help us achieve the objectives we have in the dispute resolution field more at a greater scale than was ever conceivable before. So please.
Well, and thinking back to nerdvana, I love that term. And and that's so true. And so I think one of the things is that when we sort of look at the field, it's usually the older professional, the older user of conflict resolution, and with these more technological tools available that are comfortable for our younger generations, and hopefully the growth of the use of dispute resolution strategies will be, start even earlier in people's lives, and so that they hopefully will develop the skills to approach conflict differently, with the idea of resolution rather than letting things persist.
Yeah, I do think that it's interesting to see the cultural change over the arc of my life. I mean, I remember the first time I ever heard someone say win-win on TV. I was so excited. I was like, wow, it's gone mainstream, and now this is just a very common concept. I think, when I was growing up in school, we didn't have mediation trainings. We didn't have peer mediation. But both of my kids out here in California, they went to a local public school, and they had the Compassionate Peace Builder Pledge that they would recite every day at the same time they did the Pledge of Allegiance. So there's a lot of progress that's being achieved in thinking about these things. And I think back to the era of Frank Sander when, most law schools didn't offer classes in negotiation and mediation. And now it's very common. Most law schools do offer that. So I think, again, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. We definitely do 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I don't think that it's ever unidimensional in terms of we're just going to keep progressing along this axis that's going to get better and better and better. But I do feel like the work we're doing is making a difference. And people now at least have the language, they have the skills, they have opportunities to develop their conflict resolution paradigm. And that's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing. So
it absolutely. I remember when I was teaching ADR at a local law school for about 5 years. And when I first started teaching, the students would go, I never thought there was some psychology to this stuff, and it's like, well, duh, you're dealing with people, and
there's psychology and everything. Yeah.
I know. Yeah. And so that's where I've really made it my passion to bring that basic understanding to people. But one of the things I wanted to emphasize then is really taking a look at our attitudes towards change. And change is like the sun. It's going to come up every morning, even though that's not really true anyway, but the world turns, but change is going to happen. And we, the more open we are to change, the more resilient we are with change, the more we embrace change, and the better the change will go and the healthier and happier we'll be without stress and all that kind of stuff. And so
I agree.
Because change is happening. I mean, look at all the just daily living. I had somebody over who hadn't seen some newer construction. Oh no, they put the USB things right into the electric plugs now. It's like, that didn't used to be the way, and so it was just funny. You mentioned earlier artificial intelligence, and then you also gave us that demo with the
with the Oculus goggles.
Right. How else do you see artificial intelligence influencing? I know you talked about the algorithms as far as being able to use those to come out and sort of evaluate, is this a fair resolution or not? And so that's a resource, but how else might artificial intelligence come into play?
Well, it's interesting, I do a whole class on artificial intelligence, and I find that when you discuss AI, it's a little bit of a Rorschach test, not to use another psychological analogy, but, some people, when you talk about AI, they think this is going to be the end of the world. They think about like the Terminator movies where this AI takes over and decides we're going to kill all the humans. But other people think about, there's a movie called WALL-E, which is a Pixar movie, where people just kind of become not that useful. They just sort of float around in chairs and the AI brings them snacks and sends them entertainment. It just kind of keep them out of the way because they're just more problematic. But, that's less of a dystopian vision for what AI is going to generate. But I think one of the analogies that a good friend of mine who's an expert in AI, oftentimes when there's a new innovation, there's so much excitement about what it can mean for the world. And he makes a parallel back to the discovery of radiation when Marie Curie discovered radium. And there was all this talk about, radium is going to change everything. And they put radium in milk and they put radium in face cream and they put radium on the clock faces. But eventually what they realized is, no, actually radiation is poisonous. You can't put these things in these places. It is useful in a very narrow context, but it's not as widely useful as people originally thought. And I think that's kind of what's going to happen with AI. I think right now there's discussion about, well, AI is going to drive our cars and AI is going to decide, we're going to have AI judges. We're going to have all the laws are going to be written by AIs. Maybe way, way off in the future, some of those things will come to pass. But really right now, AI is a very simple tool for achieving certain things that are very complicated for people, but are pretty easy for computers. And as computers get more powerful, AI is going to get more powerful. And just like it used to be, the best chess players in the world could beat the computers, and then they got competitive, And then the computers got a lot better than the best chess players in the world. And now no human can beat any chess playing computer anymore, because they have the ability to think farther into the game than any human can think. So I think we're going to have to get comfortable with the ideas that the algorithms that we're creating can understand the world in more sophisticated, subtle ways than we can understand the world. But that doesn't mean that they have the ability to decide what to do with that information. So even as powerful as AI is, it's just a tool. And someone described AI as kind of like the magic lamp, you know, and you rub it and the genie comes out and says, what do you want? But you have to ask the genie the right thing. And if you make the wrong wish, you know, you can have some unintended consequences that can be really bad, like the monkey's paw. But if you ask the right wish, so we're going to have to ask ourselves, what is it that we're going to ask of the genie and the magic lamp of AI? And so AI always has to be under human control. And as long as it is, I think we're going to be able to use it to, as I say, achieve the objectives we have as dispute resolvers, to help people find fast and fair resolutions to their disputes. But you can imagine how these tools could be used for malevolent purposes as well. So we're going to have to figure out how to civilize the technology before it gets out of control.
Well, you just tapped into, you know, the next question, and you know, some of the ethical concerns then. And I guess that's, as you just mentioned, is that they're unfortunately, there are always people out there who have less than you know, benevolent intentions, and so the maluse of it is can be fearful. So, you know, anything that you can shed a light on as far as some of the key concerns, two or three key concerns.
Yeah, and I mentioned before ICODR, the International Council for Online Dispute Resolution. That organization exists to promote a set of ethical standards for ODR. And we've distilled that out of, you know, many thousands of pages of scholarship on ethical principles for ODR. But this is something very simple. You could just write it on a card and keep it in your wallet. You know, I think it's something like 8 or 9 different ethical standards that we believe all ODR providers should abide to. And I think it's not that hard to imagine a bad actor who doesn't take those ethical standards very seriously, building an ODR service and making it available to the public and saying, yes, you can trust this service and it is fair and impartial, and you know, it is confidential, but maybe on the back end, they're not abiding by those standards. Maybe they are sharing the information secretly with other parties. Maybe they are putting their thumb on the scale to ensure that one side wins more often than the other side. So for a long time, I talked about, well, maybe one day we could use ODR to do X, Y, and Z thing. And now I'm gratified that's actually happening. But now my concern is, now that we have created all these ODR services, I want to make sure we have a yardstick so that we can go and ensure, either through auditing or self-certification or something, that these services that are being widely adopted live up to the ethical standards we have in the field. Because I think there could be abuses if we don't keep a close eye on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the analogy I'd have to that is like, you know, even with the ABA, HCR, AAA, you know, combined ethical practices, you know, when we were first encountering people, well, I'm not going online, you know, it's like, you're just going to stop working, you know, but part of your obligation in the ethical standards is that you keep current, you know, on practices, on technology and things like that. And so it's like, well, then you're not abiding by these ethical principles that have otherwise been around for, you know, the last, you know, 15, 20 years. And so, so it's like, oh, I never thought about it like that. You know?
Well, and another thing is, I think if you look at the ABA, AAA, SPIDER ethical standards, they're really talking about mediators and arbitrators. But what we now have is we have computer programmers who are writing software that are playing some of those roles. And we don't really have ethical standards for the providers of the software, but we do need to have ethical standards. So I think we need to think about how the field is evolving and evolve our ethical standards to adapt to those new actors within dispute resolution services. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, and so as the field grows, then there are other services and technology that develop to support that. So that's what you're talking about, yeah. And so when are you, what I understood you to say is that these ethical guidelines are in process or in progress right now?
No, the ICODR standards have already been, they've been out for a couple of years, and for free, it's all free on the ICODR website. There's a couple documents that apply those standards to different application areas. So when video conferencing and mediation became very common, we issued a set of best practices, broken down by the ethical standards for ODR. We talk about ODR in payment disputes. How do these ethical standards play out in terms of how those systems should be designed? So it's all available on the iCoder website, and I urge people to check them out. But I think to also self-certify against those standards, to say, I like these standards and I'm going to abide by them, that's the reason to become an iCoder member, because then you can put that seal, on your website. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, I'll make sure I get all that together as far as our show notes so people have something to follow up on.
Oh, great.
Yeah. I mentioned early on that you are a prolific writer, and I can see a number of publications here. And I guess if you really wanted somebody to pay attention to one or two of all of these articles that are particularly relevant to what we're just talking about, what would you say the two would be?
Oof, that's tough. You're asking me to pick between my babies here, Deborah. That's complicated. There is one piece that I did recently for Negotiation Journal. If you go to colinrule.com/writing, most of my articles are there.
Okay.
And there's one that I did recently with, as I mentioned, Dan Martinez from Stanford, Ethan Katch from UMass, and another good friend, Leah Wing, who's a co-director of the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution. We were talking about kind of how ODR evolved and sort of where things are headed. Less about AI and more about dispute systems design in ODR, and a little bit about sort of agents, how software-based agents may affect the future of ODR. I think that's a great article, so I urge everybody to read it. But let's see, I get to pick one more, huh?
Yeah.
I think I'm going to cheat a little bit and say there's a book called Odr Theory and Practice, which is sort of, there's been 2 editions of it, and the new edition's coming out soon. But the old one is available for free online. You can do a Google search on ODR Theory and Practice. It's an edited volume with almost all of the leaders of the online dispute resolution field. We all did chapters talking about different aspects of the field. So it's great that it's available full text. So I urge you to go check it out. And when the new version comes out, it should be any day now, that's going to be really, really fun to read too.
Oh, that sounds absolutely marvelous. To have all these thought leaders in this field of ODR all contributing their perspectives and insights, and wow, that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, you'd be hard pressed to find a better place to find the full periphery of everything that's going on in the ODR field than what goes on in that book. So,
well, Colin, you said yourself that you were a self-proclaimed nerd. And so how do you like to spend your spare time? Sounds like all your professional time is online.
Well, I'm tempted to tell you about all my nerdy activities, but I do like to play video games. So that is a very nerdy activity. My younger son, whose name is Alexander David Rule, for the initials. Thank you very much. ADR. Yeah.
Very good.
If I was smart, I would have named him Oliver, because then I could have had an ODR, but no, we have an ADR. He's very into a very complicated video game, which is an esports game that's played all over the world, and he got me into it. So that's a nice hobby of mine. But my wife is a food writer and a chef, so we love to make things. Tonight I'm making quiche for dinner, so I'm looking forward to going home and whipping up some asparagus and putting that together. So I think, and then I'm a runner, so running, food, and video games. That's pretty much all I need outside of my day-to-day work.
Well, very good. It's always nice to know a little bit something more about my guest speakers. And so
thank you for asking.
You're very welcome. I used to be a runner, but had let that go a while back. But I used to be quite the cook and had a gourmet side business for quite a while. But
oh wow! Well, what about your video game career? Come on, let's go for all 3.
Just Pac-Man when I'm sitting in my kid's dental office.
That works.
Yeah. My son's big into it, but there's a lot to be learned from video games, and
sure,
all good stuff.
Again, when you think back to Pac-Man running around and eating the pills, and now you look at these modern video games, I mean, it is incredible how complicated and visually the narratives. I mean, the video game industry is now bigger than Hollywood, and it's just getting bigger all the time. So what we think of as video games, probably from the prior generation, that's not what the current generation thinks of when you say video games. Yeah.
I had the good fortune of doing some work for Sony here in San Diego for a while, and so got exposed to all their development and stuff. And one of my key points of contact, I think he was vice president of something, but he goes, my mom would always yell at me for always playing these video games, but look where I am today,
That's it. Right.
Yeah. Well, Colin, as we wrap up, it's been absolutely delightful to get to know you a little bit better and to reconnect after, so many years, because we do go back for quite a while. I guess if there's one recommendation you'd have for today's dispute resolution, as I like to call it, enthusiast.
Sure.
We're committed to resolving conflict. What might that be?
Well, I always share as I said, I grew up in Texas, and I had a Texas grandfather who was filled with lots of witticisms and bits of wisdom. But one of the things that I called him Ping Pong. So his name was Mac, but I called him Ping Pong. And Ping Pong always used to say to me, Colin, promise me one thing. Don't build your business where the highway is. Build your business where the highway is going. And I feel like that admonition really resonates with a lot of us in the dispute resolution field. I think we're comfortable with the way things are now. But we sort of see where things are headed. And if we're building a practice, if we're trying to stay relevant in the lives of our parties, I think we need to think not only about where we are now, but we got to think about where it's going. And if you can build your practice to benefit from some of these trends, I think you'll make it through this period, these transitions, this change, as you mentioned, smelling like a rose. But if you resist it and say, I don't like it, I'm going to fight it, I'm going to drag my heels, unfortunately, change waits for no one, and that's when you may get left behind, or at least be getting a slice of a shrinking pie. So my advice to everybody is, don't be scared of this. It's okay. Come to mediate.com. We'll help you out. We'll hold your hand. There's more opportunity than there is challenges in these changes if we can embrace them and then get ahead of it. So why don't I leave it there?
They're very good. Well, thank you, Colin. That is excellent advice, because we certainly have seen businesses that didn't change and they're no longer there,
Blockbuster, exactly. We don't want to be the blockbuster of mediation. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm excited to see what mediate.com is going to be, coming forth with all kinds of exciting changes. And so the resources continue to grow for the ADR, ODR, practitioner. And so I like to say, learn, live, and grow. That's all we can do.
Absolutely.
I certainly hope that you enjoyed Colin Rule. It has just brought us forward into the technological advances of where our world is going and how quickly that happened during our COVID time, rapidly ramping up to all kinds of virtual platforms. He is truly a leader in his field. Well, don't go away, because we have another dynamic leader in his own right. This time we're going to hear from Dr. Troy Hall, and Troy has actually traveled worldwide, working from tribal communities into major corporations, taking his ideas about engagement is not enough. We need to focus more on cohesion, of making people feel involved and engaged. And Troy has some excellent stories as he unfolds his story, many of which comes from his unfortunately deceased mother, Fanny, but he's named a book after her, Fanny Rules, and the gems and insights he shares that he gleaned from his mother throughout his growing up years that have really shaped and influenced his mindset for today. So don't go away. Troy is coming up very quickly, and you're going to enjoy him. Believe me, I certainly did. One of the best, among the best, of podcast interviews. Dr. Troy Hall, our next guest. Mark your calendar, spread the word, subscribe if you aren't already, and be there in just a couple of weeks. Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc.